Okay, we're going to try this. Welcome to the Arkansas Museums Association second virtual session, and we're excited to have you here today. I was having a little technical trouble, so I apologize if my audio is not great, but you only have to hear me for a minute. We're so grateful to our presenters for their willingness to switch their in-person presentations that they'd prepared for their annual conference in March to these virtual versions that we're presenting over the next few months. Please note that this session is being recorded, so don't say anything that you don't want on the record forever and ever, and it will be sent to all registered attendees later this week. We also have closed captioning happening, so click on that button if you would like to take advantage of that feature. We'd like to thank our sponsors who helped make this virtual world possible for us. The Arkansas Humanities Council granted the funds to pay for our Zoom subscription, and JamaBest and Melanie Thornton have funded the closed captioning services. Melanie's also our presenter today, so she gets double thanks. And thank you to all of our volunteers who make this organization work. We're an all-volunteer association, and its members are obviously committed to the mutual support of the museum sector here in Arkansas. The Arkansas Museum's website has a list of all of our sessions with links to registration for those sessions. Our next one is December 9th with two people from the Shiloh Museum talking about digitizing media. This session is being done as a webinar, so open discussion will not be possible. However, you can make comments in the chat or put questions in the Q&A. Kim Hosey of the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History, a member of our Professional Development Committee, is helping monitor the Q&A today. Thank you, Kim. So let's get down to business. This year, we've heard a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion. What often gets left out of that discussion is accessibility. I've worked in and with disability service organizations in the past, and I can't tell you how much I learned from that work. One of the things I've really come to understand is that increasing accessibility for people with disabilities actually creates greater accessibility for everyone. It makes for more effective communication with a wider audience and a friendlier museum experience. Our presenter today is Melanie Thornton. She's the coordinator of Access and Equity Outreach at the University of Arkansas Partners for Inclusive Communities. In this position, she provides professional development and technical assistance on topics related to disability, diversity, digital access, leadership, and design. Previously, she worked at the Disability Resource Center at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, where she served as the associate director and then director of the Project PACE. In the capacity of director of Project PACE, she led the campus community in increasing capacity related to web accessibility and inclusive curricular design. Melanie has presented at state, national, and international conferences on topics related to disability and access, and has worked as an independent consultant in a variety of capacities for over 10 years. So Melanie, you can take it away. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Angie. Zoom is telling me I don't have permission to share. So
okay.
Can you make me a co-host or?
Done. I made you a host.
Great, thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for that introduction, Angie. I was thinking, as you were reading my bio, I should have sent you a much shorter bio, but thank you for that. I think that was the one that I submitted with my proposal, so it was more lengthy than normal. So thanks, everyone, for being here, and thank you for having me. I always love working with the folks at AMA. Y'all are some of the most fun people that I work with in this work that I do, so it's good to be here. So today we're going to be just talking about some of the high level accessibility things that everyone can do. You know, a lot of times we think of access as being in the hands of people who are architects or web professionals, but really access, when it comes down to it, is in the hands of all of us. And there are things that we all are involved in every day that we can make accessible or inaccessible. So we're going to talk today about how to make those accessible. I will say that I'm pretty informal in terms of questions. So for you, Kim and Angie, as you watch the questions, just if you see a question that feels like it needs to be answered right away, feel free to interrupt me. Otherwise, we have some natural stopping points where I can invite or respond to questions. So before we can talk about our roles to make the world more accessible, let's talk a little bit about what digital access is. So digital accessibility really includes more than just web accessibility. It includes the creation of anything digital and making that accessible. So it's websites, mobile apps, electronic documents, things like Word and PowerPoint, Zoom, anything that is electronic or digital can be made accessible or inaccessible. So it's making those things usable by the widest range of users possible. And on this slide, you see this symbol that has come to be the symbol for digital access. If you're a Mac user, you may have seen kind of a similar symbol on your Mac with the accessibility features that are installed in the Mac. But it's a human figure with hands outstretched, and it's come to symbolize digital accessibility in general. So when we talk about, well, when web designers talk about accessibility, they use the acronym POUR, P-O-U-R, which stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, because they're really designing things with code and things that are more complex than most of us design. But today, we're going to be talking about two of those principles, perceivable and understandable. So when we talk about those two principles, we're going to make sure that visual components of things that we do are accessible, audio components are accessible, and today we have a really good example of that. The audio of today's session is being captioned, and notice it's by a real live captioner, not auto, AUTO captioning, which is in most of our experiences woefully inadequate. So we thank our captionist for providing those captions today. We want to make sure that information is intuitive and as clearly written as possible. There's a lot of information about using plain language. That would be one way to do that. And then we want to make sure that people who are using assistive technology or accessing things in a different way than we kind of assume people do normally can access the content. So some of the common barriers are kind of just the flip side of that. One is videos without captions, or as I kind of alluded to, videos with automatically generated captions, which don't meet the standard of providing effective and equal access. Videos that are purely visual. So what I mean by that, sometimes this is real popular for a while. People would create a video where someone would basically tell their story by picking up pieces of paper that had information on each paper, putting it down and picking up the next one. In the background, you have lovely music playing, but there's no voiceover, nothing is narrated. And so, as you can imagine, a blind person would only get the pretty music playing in the background, but really wouldn't get access to the content. Images with no alt text, and alt text is just a shorthand way of saying descriptions, image descriptions, and we'll talk more about what alt text is and how to add it shortly. Poor contrast is a problem for all of us, but especially a problem for people who are colorblind or people with low vision. Links that are not descriptive, clicking on a link and not knowing exactly where it's going to take you can be a problem, but especially for people who are using a screen reader. And I'll explain more about how screen readers work here in just a minute. That can be a problem. Headings that are not structured properly And then finally, navigation that requires a mouse. A lot of designers kind of make the assumption that using a mouse is the way that people navigate, but a lot of people navigate using the keyboard alone without a mouse. And so, or other kinds of navigation. So that navigation needs to be accessible. So on this slide, you see an image of someone's hand resting on a series of Braille dots that are a part of what's called a refreshable Braille display. And the way that works is it works in conjunction with what's called a screen reader, which is a software that reads what's on the screen of a computer, not just the words, but also it would read, give out output for buttons and links and other things as a person navigates that screen, that computer. So the screen reader gives the output, and in this case, rather than providing it auditorily, as it would for some users, it would provide that in Braille. And then the person would read a line of Braille, hit a refresh button, and then read the next line of Braille. So there's some great assistive technology available to people who are blind, people with other types of conditions, but basically things have to be designed in ways that work with that technology, or else the technology can only get a person so far. So who is excluded by inaccessible design? We often spend a lot of time talking about people who are blind in terms of technology, because the design of things really often excludes people who are blind more than other people in the digital world. But as we've talked about already, you know, videos without captioning exclude people who are deaf or hard of hearing. People with low vision who may access the computer visually, but need to have things magnified can also be excluded. People who are deafblind, people with motor related conditions can be excluded if things are not designed well. People with dyslexia or other reading related conditions, people who are colorblind, and then finally people with conditions that affect auditory or visual processing. So a person may be hearing, but the captions may still help because of an auditory processing related condition. So at this point, let's just go ahead and dive in and talk about some of the ways that you can make your corner of the world more accessible. And we're going to start with some things that are pretty simple. In fact, the first one in terms of email or discussion boards or email listservs requires little, if any, technical abilities. So the first tip is just to use meaningful subject lines, especially in discussion lists. Because if someone is using assistive technology, or if they have a condition that affects, like dyslexia, for example, that affects their reading speed, then it can be pretty labor intensive to come to an email that is so general, the subject is so general that they have to dive in to figure out what it's about. So for example, if you're sending an email, you might, instead of saying need your assistance with budget. It lets someone know where you're going with that. If you're on a listserv and you have a question, instead of just posting question, tell people what that question's about. Question about service animals, for example, or questions about exhibits, so that the people that are on your listserv will know, is this something that I want to spend my time and dive down into? And really that helps us all, right? To spend our time in the way that is most productive. The second tip, also related to email, is, and this is one that I commonly see, is don't send an email that is basically just an image. So people who are using screen reader or other kinds of technology that reads back text to them, that technology can't read an image. So if a person posts an image into an email and sends it, then a person who is using, a blind person who gets that email would probably only hear image, and a person who can see the image but has a reading related disability like dyslexia would not be able to pull that text out in order for their technology, their assistive technology, to read it. So it's important to include the text as well. If you use MS Outlook, you can actually add alt text or text descriptions to your image, and I'll be showing you how to do that in Word, which is almost the exact same way that you would do that in MS Outlook. Some other email apps also may allow this, and some email apps actually allow you to edit the HTML, which is even better. But if none of that's available, or you just don't feel comfortable using that aspect of your email, you can also just add the text that's in the image as part of the email. So you might either post the image at top or bottom, but make sure that all of the text that's in that image is also in the email itself, so that people have access to both. So that takes us to Word documents. And I want to check in here before we move to Word documents and see if there are questions.
Hello there. So we do have one question. So what are programs that translate into Braille, or does that come with hardware?
That's a good question. So okay, let me back off. Let's talk about just the digital world. So if a person is using technology like I showed before, the refreshable Braille device, then the screen reader that they're using, such as JAWS or NVDA, pulls the data, if you will, from the software or website, and then the device provides that to the person in Braille. So the translation, so to speak, happens between the software for the screen reader and the software that comes with the refreshable Braille device. If, on the other hand, you are talking about kind of more face-to-face situations where you would provide actual printed Braille, then there are a variety of types of software that will translate that, but it always requires, in order to do it effectively, requires someone who really knows how to make sure that the original document is set up in a good way, so that when it translates into Braille, it does so in a way that's effective. And I've been talking and thinking, okay, what are some of the softwares that are used? And I don't use them that commonly, so I'm going to follow up on that and provide you with some of the applications that can be used if you'd like to create Braille in the real life face-to-face situation. Is that the only one so far?
Yes, so that was
Okay.
the only one. Thank you.
Okay. So next time, just make sure you ask one that I'm ready for. Just kidding. All right, so let's talk about Microsoft Word. I tend to focus on Microsoft products for a couple reasons. One, they're probably the most commonly used still in terms of creating documents and PowerPoint, and they're the more advanced products in terms of creating accessible documents. They have more features available that allow people to put in what is needing, or create an output that is the most accessible. You can make things somewhat accessible if you're using other types of document software, but you're a little bit more limited in that regard. So let's talk about tip number 3, which is to add alt text to images. As I've already kind of mentioned, without alt text, a screen reader will not know what an image is. In Word, a screen reader user would just hear graphic when they hit an image if there's no alt text. So when you add alt text, you want to just describe the image. There's no reason to say image of or picture of, just describe what is there visually. And on this slide is an example of what you see when you right click on the image and choose to add alt text. And we'll do that together here in just a minute. So the steps for adding alt text are, as I said before, just like they are in Microsoft Outlook. You just right click on the image and then you choose from the drop down menu, edit alt text. And if you're using an older version of Microsoft products, you may have to first choose format picture, but in the newer versions, it's right there. Right after you right click, you have the option to edit alt text, and that's true whether you're using a PC or a Mac. So let's flip over to Word and let's do that together. So here is an image that is in my document and I want to add alt text. So I simply right click on it, choose edit alt text, and then I hope that you can see that. You may have to move a few things around. Then a panel pops up on the right-hand side and you just add the alt text. And descriptive text or image descriptions are somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? It depends on the context. It's contextual and it's subjective. That's the word I want. So in this particular image, to some degree, how I describe it may depend on my use for the image. And I want to be as succinct as possible, but also convey what is missing for a person who's not seeing the image. So let's say that I'm at a university and this is, I think of this as an image of our lab in the university. So I might say, let's say students are seated at a row of computers in a lab. So that kind of gives you the sense of what's happening in the image. On the other hand, if I am emphasizing the diversity of our campus, I might say something about a diverse group of students are sitting at a row of computers in the lab. So your choice to emphasize one thing or another is okay, as long as you get the sense of what's happening in the image. Now you'll notice a couple of things right here in this panel. One, I have the option to also mark this image as decorative. If I were to decide that a certain image is really just eye candy and it really adds nothing to the page, first I wonder why we would use something that's isn't additive. But if I determine that it's not additive anyway, I could mark that as purely decorative. And what that does is basically it tells the screen reader, skip over this, and so they don't hear that there's an image there. I tend to lean toward describing images, even if it's succinctly, so that a blind person knows that there are images there, just as their sighted peers would. The other thing that you'll notice here is that there is a button that says, generate a description for me. I highly recommend that you avoid allowing Word to generate descriptions for you. Not long ago, I just tested to see what kinds of descriptions I might get, allowing it to do that. And I had a different image than this. It was an image of a young man writing at a chalkboard, and there was an older man with a book looking like he's about to hit the guy over the head. and the automatically generated text said something like one person, maybe two, smiling. Well, and neither of them were smiling. The young man was looking afraid that he was going to get hit on the head. So it doesn't do a very good job. So you don't want to rely on the automatically generated descriptions at all. Okay, going back to the PowerPoint slides. Oh, one thing I didn't say is once you put the alt text in, there's nothing to click to save it. It's there. And if you're using Microsoft PowerPoint or Word, if you pull an image that you have an alt text in Word into a PowerPoint or into another Word document, that alt text will remain with it. So that's one nice feature. Okay, so next, the next tip is to use headings properly. When sighted people look at a Word document, for example, we see, certain things that are bolded that may look like headings. And we see there's like a visual structure there typically. But unless the headings are really put in properly, a blind person wouldn't have access to that structure. So using actual true headings in a Word document provides more structure. If you ever pick up a document or just imagine back in the days when people actually read newspapers, if you picked up a newspaper and all of the headings and all of the text was all exactly the same size, that's kind of similar to the experience of a person who is a screen reader user getting a document that has no true headings and is not structured properly. So most people create headings by just taking the normal text, making them larger, making them a different color or bolder. But while that looks like a heading, it's not creating a true heading. And there are a lot of advantages in your design of using true headings. So if you're not already using headings, and that's the only thing that you take away from this, I think you'll be happier because it will make your use of document creation software richer and more effective, really. And we'll look at how that happens here in just a bit. But first, let's go through the steps of adding headings in a document. So the first thing you do is you just highlight the text in your document, and you would go over and click on the appropriate heading in the ribbon. This is the home ribbon in MS Word, or you could also use keyboard shortcuts. On a PC, it's Control-Alt-1, and on a Mac, it's Command-Alt-1 to add that heading. So let's look at that in an actual document. So first, let's look at this document. I'm going to close the alt text window there. So this document already has an actual heading number 1. And the way that I can tell that is if I scroll over in my ribbon, you can see that heading 1 is highlighted. See, it looks different than heading 2. It's got kind of a square around it. So it already has a heading there. And this one is also a true heading. See how it's got the heading 2 is highlighted. It has a square around it. But typically what I see when I go into a document is that this will, if I were to go to something that looked like a heading, it actually, normal would be highlighted, but it would have colors and bold added, for example, but it wouldn't be a true heading like you can see here. So I want to make this text where it says apply heading 2 to this text a heading. So all I do is highlight it and go up here and add click on heading 2. So now those all match. Now, let's imagine that you don't really care for that font and you want to change your heading level 2. And I would agree, it's kind of thin and which is not as visible as if it were thicker. So I'm going to change it to Helvetica. That's one of my favorites. And I'm going to make it bold. Now, I changed that one, but you notice these other two are still look the same. Now, if I were not using true headings, I'd have to go through my whole document and apply that style to it. But here, instead, I can right click on heading 2 and tell it to update heading 2 to match this selection. And then I've changed all of my heading 2s to match that one. So as you can see, using the headings appropriately is not only good for accessibility, it's also good for design, and it'll save you time in the long run. Let me check in and see if there are questions at this point.
We do have one additional question.
Okay.
Regarding the alt text again, for the automated descriptions, for example, when you're talking about Word, doing the automated descriptions of the images, would you be able to go back and edit those? So if, for example, you were lost and didn't really know where to start in regards to creating your own descriptions?
Yes, in fact, Word sometimes just automatically will generate those descriptions. And you can usually tell when you right click on it and say add alt text, if it's generated automatically. It's set, in fact, I think it says below it, this description generated automatically or something like that. But yes, you can then just delete that and type over it and add your own description. Good question. Okay, so the next tip is create meaningful links. So what we want to do, and when we think about links, we want to make sure that when someone using a screen reader hits that link, that they can tell right away where that link's going to take them. So, and to make it just more both user-friendly and visually more appealing. So a lot of times what people do is they take a link like this one, exploreaccess.org/ yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to read all those numbers for the sake of our captionist, but they take that URL and just paste it into the document like I have here, and it creates a link. But it's some of them can be really long and cumbersome and not very helpful in terms of telling someone where that's going to take them. So instead of doing something like that, I would want to write the text that describes where that link goes, and then highlight it. I'll highlight it, right click on it, choose add hyperlink, and then I can paste this URL in, and that will create the link. And we'll go through that in a minute here. Many of you probably already are doing this, but just in case, I want to go through those steps together. Another thing that people often do is to use something like click here or more on a web page. Typically, it's less common in a Word document, but on a web page, it's very often that you may have several things on a page that all say click here or more, but they don't really tell the user where they're going. So it's best to, instead of, for example, click here to learn about accessible documents, use learn more about accessible documents, where accessible documents is your link. That way the person knows where they're headed. Another way of doing things that is commonly seen is if people are providing various formats of a report, they might have the name of the annual report or the whatever report, and then have the formats as the links. And that looks kind of nice, but again, if you have a page that has lots of different, let's say you have handouts for your conference, and people have provided them in both the actual PowerPoint and a PDF of the PowerPoint, for example. And so you have the name of the session, and then you have PPT as a link and PDF as a link. Well, if a person is just trying to find what they're looking for in the links, a person who's blind, they're just going to hear PPT, PDF, PPT, PDF. So if you put the name of the session along with that and then add the format, that's much better, like this: annual report PDF and annual report doc. And including, when you're providing documents on the web, including the format is a really good practice in general, because it lets the person know what to expect when they select that link. If I'm, and for any of us, it's true. So if I know something's in a Word format and I click on it, I know that it's just going to download to my downloads folder. So I know where to go to look for it. Whereas if I click on a link that's a PDF, I may have my settings so that it opens up in the web browser. So it's really nice for any of us to know what to expect there. So let's go back to the Word document again. And let's just go through that real quickly together. So with this sentence here, a copy of our latest report is available for download. A lot of times people would just choose download as the link. That's kind of common, but we would want to have instead, if we left the sentence this way, to have our latest report to be the link. That's much clearer. So to do that, I just right click on that link, choose hyperlink, and then in the email address, I would just add the URL there. I'm not sure why that wants to add the email there. It's something else. I guess it's trying to tell me who I emailed last. Sorry about that. Let me cancel that. Let's start over. I've never seen that before, so it kind of threw me. Ignore that. So I just add that URL and click on OK. And then the link is there. Much neater and cleaner than if I had pasted the URL there, and more accessible. All right. So let's next talk about, we're halfway there, folks. We're on 5. We've got 5 more. Let's next talk about PowerPoint. For PowerPoint, one of the main things you want to do is to make sure that you choose the correct slide layouts for what you want to do. So the thing to avoid is choosing blank slides. So here is an image or a screen capture of a PowerPoint, of the PowerPoint application, and I've selected the little drop-down menu that has the different slide layouts. And what a lot of people do is they choose blank, and then they just add the text boxes that they want to do. But I'm just saying, don't do that. Instead, start with either the title and content slide, or the title slide or section header, or the 2 content slides, in order, whatever fits your layout the best. Even if you don't want a bulleted list, you can remove the bullets and just put the text there. But if you start with these, that's more likely to be accessible. This also, one of the quick ways you can check to make sure that your PowerPoint is accessible. I'm going to pull out of the slideshow for a minute. You see, by default, over to the left-hand side, we can see these thumbnails of the slides. I'm going to make that just a little bigger there. But down at the bottom, oops, if you go to this little button, right now it says normal, and I click on it again. I'm sorry if this is not visible, but I'm choosing a different format, and you can also do that in your drop-down menu here, but you'll see that I can see all of the text that's on all of my slides because I've made sure that when I put that content in, I've done so in a way that provides access to all of that. So if I wanted to, let's say someone said, well, I'd like a text version of your slideshow, I could just take that and paste it into Word and have that immediately. But it's also a quick way to make sure that when if I save this as a PDF, for example, that all of that text is going to be accessible to someone who's looking at my PowerPoint or using a screen reader to read the PowerPoint. So I'm going back into the slideshow. Okay, so that's number 6. Number 7 in terms of PowerPoint is to provide good contrast. And we talked about that a little at the beginning, that that does affect people who are colorblind or people with low vision. And you would hope that PowerPoint slides, like if you just selected any of them, that they would provide good content, or good contrast, but that's really not always the case. I've looked at some of them that, especially those that have kind of a gradient background, the text may show up well on part of the slide, but not so well on another part. So just make sure that you select a slide that is either like use black or dark blue text on a light colored background, or light text on a dark background works well. Your goal is to hit something that's 4.5 to 1 or better. For most of us, that doesn't mean a whole lot, but if you're a graphic designer, you know exactly what that means. If you're not sure about the contrast, if you're using something that is not real clear to you, if it's going to provide that level of contrast, then there are lots of ways you can check that contrast out, regardless of whether you're designing PowerPoint or Word or a website. There are different tools that you can use that help you test that out. And before we started, I provided the link to a page. It's exploreaccess.org/handouts. And if you go there, you can download this PowerPoint. And so you'll have the links to all of these contrast checkers on there, and you can find the one that works best for you. All right, before we move forward, I'd like to just check and see if there are other questions.
So in this moment, I'm not seeing any additional questions. We are getting some comments though, but no questions at the moment.
All right, thank you, Kim. All right, and the last tip, related to PowerPoint is to make sure that you use a unique heading for each slide. So if you're especially if you're providing something that's complex, like a class or an online session like this, a presentation, and you send people the PowerPoint in advance, which is another good practice, then a person who is blind or using a screen reader, it's helpful to be able to follow along, and to do so and know where the person is, where the presenter is. It helps if all of those headings are unique. So if you're providing, sometimes your content might flow over from one slide to another. And if that's the case, then you want to just use a format like I've described here, data from our study 1, data from our study 2. You could have something like data from our study, more data from our study, just whatever format works for you, so that it makes that just a little bit different than the slide before. All right, we are about ready to look at social media, but I do see a question in the Q&A, so I'll check in with you.
It popped up on me as soon as I said no questions.
They're tricky that way.
So Scott has been using PowerPoint a bit for both public consumption and at their museum when they make presentations elsewhere. Do you think it is the best platform to use?
I think that it's in terms of presentation software, I think that PowerPoint is the easiest to add accessibility features to. I guess we could get into a whole philosophical discussion about whether PowerPoint is the best way to go in general. I don't know. I think there are some downsides to it. I think we become way too dependent on it. But I think that in terms of accessible, I'm just going to say in terms of accessibility, PowerPoint allows you to provide something that kind of grounds people who like to be kind of visually grounded, to know where you are and where you're going next. It gives you a pretty easy way to save something in a digital format that can be provided to folks, and also to print something that when you're in a real life setting, to be provided to folks who like to have that. So it does have some versatility in that regard, and can, if you use it correctly, can be used in a way that makes things fully accessible. So I'll stop there. Feel free to follow up if I didn't really answer your question in the way you were hoping. So let's talk a little bit about social media. So tip number 9 is to add alt text to images, well, on any social media platform, but I'm focused here on Facebook because it was one of the first to give us the option to add alt text, and it's used by a lot of us still. So on Facebook, alt text can be added to new or existing photos. Facebook also has automatically generated descriptions, but they again are not very adequate. One person smiling is also very common, or two people smiling is kind of a common way that it describes most images if there are people in it, or whether they're indoors or outdoors is about as good as you get. So you want to, again, add your own, and it's really not very difficult to do that. The other thing that we sometimes do is, we often share photos that generated or originated on somebody else's page. There's not a way to add the alt text or add the description behind the photo, so to speak, if it's somebody else's. So in that case, you would just add it to the post. But let's look at how to add alt text in Facebook. So here's the page that I keep flipping by because I knew at some point I'd want to use it. So to add the image, let's see if I can center that a little better. To add the image, I could either drag and drop it, or I can choose photo or video and go and grab a photo that I want to add. And once I choose the photo, this new Facebook is kind of slow, but once I choose it and it's really in there, and I hover over it, I'll see a link that says, or a button that says edit, and I want to choose that. Oh, guess I need to pull that back over, sorry. And then to the left, you'll see that one of the options is alternative text. So if you select that, a couple of things pop up, and let's look at those. So here you can see that if I don't put anything in this box, this little button tells me, this radio button tells me that the auto generated text is what people are going to hear if they're using a screen reader and get to this image. And the auto-generated description says text that says access matters. So Facebook is pretty good at reading text. So that's nice. You know, if you just post a meme that has a lot of text, it will be read pretty well. But then it tries to take these little images that are the access symbols and it tries to turn them into characters. So after that, it gets into some text that is just going to sound like gobbledygook. So if I click in this area that says custom alt text, the minute I start to type something, then Facebook realizes, okay, you don't want to use that, you want to use your own. So I would just say access matters, and then various access symbols. And I could describe those, or I could leave it at various access symbols. I might say, including, let's see, including Braille, neuro, diversity, oops. I think I spelled that right, yep. Universal access symbol, interpreting, and service animal. So in some cases, I would want to be that specific. And so once I've added that custom alt text, then I would just click save. And then I want to go back to my post. I could add whatever I want to above it in the post, and then I would post it. I won't do that because I've done that several times in these sessions. So I've got that one on the page already. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. While we're talking about social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram also allow you to add alt text. And one of the resources that I've provided in a handout is a link to the Social Media Accessibility Toolkit, which walks you through how to add alt text on those platforms as well. And now we're at number 10. This one is one of my favorites. And this is number 10 is use Camel Case for your hashtags. And so Camel Case, what that is it refers to capitalizing the first letter of each word in your hashtag. So instead of disability inclusion with all lowercase letters, you would use disability inclusion capitalizing the D and the I. And that makes things more visually easy to read. And it also allows a JAWS user or a screen reader user, the screen reader will read those out as separate words too. So makes it more accessible for a lot of us. Okay, so we are at the hour and we have plenty of time for other questions if you have them. Kim?
So I'm sure we may be getting some pouring in here soon. At the moment, I'm not seeing any.
Melanie, I have a question, and it won't let me as the host post in the Q&A. But if we were going to hire, or you're putting out an RFP for a website designer, and you want to make sure that your site is accessible, is there a certain kind of language or some specific way that you can tell somebody knows what they're doing when you say you need it to be accessible?
Yes, well, you would want to include in the language advertising it that the person needs to be familiar with WCAG, and that's WCAG 2.0 or 2.1 guidelines.
Okay.
And then you probably would want to, beyond that, come up with some questions that let's say you get someone who says, yes, I'm familiar with the guidelines. The next step would be to have some questions that kind of get to their familiarity so that you can really discern that someone designs in ways that are accessible. One thing to do would be for them to provide you with some sites that they've designed before, and you check those out or have someone check those out to see how accessible they are. A real quick way to check if someone designs in a way that's accessible is to go to a website. Let me just go to a website and navigate using the tab key. So one of the features of an accessible site is that, can you see that in the top left-hand corner where it says skip the content? One of the key features of an accessible site is that you can skip the navigation on any page. So when you hit the tab key once, you should see a button pop up that allows you to do that. So the other thing is you should be able to get to everything you need to get to by just hitting the tab key. So I'm going through the links here, and you see when I hit the links that have a drop-down menu, I can keep on tabbing to those and they open up just fine. If the site were not designed in a way that's accessible, and this is real common, I might have to use my mouse in order to get to those. So if you have someone that's applying for a job and they say, oh, yes, I'm familiar, but then in their portfolio, they're sending you sites that are designed that don't allow you to tab to everything, then you know that maybe they know it, but that's not maybe they're familiar with the guidelines, but that's not their typical way of designing. Another thing related to the tabbing is you should be able to see where you are. So sometimes you can tab everywhere, but you don't know where you are. Like right here, there's this square that pops up, but some people think it's really pretty to hide that square. I mean, by default, you see where you're going. Let me go to just a regular link. Even on a regular link, there's a square around that. But some designers put in code that suppresses that. I don't know why they think it's prettier for us not to be able to see where we are when we tab, but it's a common thing. So that would be another hint that maybe this person is not really that committed to accessibility. There are also, are you a Mac user or a PC user? Both. Okay, good. On a Mac, there's a tool you can download called, and I'll send that as a follow-up. It's just Safari A11Y, and it's a plugin that goes into Safari. And if you have that on your Mac, you can right-click on any web page and choose various features. So for example, I could choose images and I could actually see the alt text that's there. Let me see if I can show you that. I'll go to the home page. So this is the one that has images on it. If I click on images, I can see the alt text that's there for those. So I can pretty quickly tell if someone is adding alt text or if not, if they haven't. Now they could have decided this was just eye candy and had what's called a null alt text. So there's no description, but it says image alt and then the quotes are blank, and that's okay sometimes. But if there's no alt text at all, there'll be image alt and then a big X. So you can quickly see, you can also run a page through WebAIM's tool called Wave. You can find that at webaim.org and then search on their page for Wave, WAVE. And it'll also give you a real quick assessment of the accessibility of a page. I hope that helps.
No, it does. That's really, really helpful. I wrote that all down. Thank you.
Okay. And you can also give me a holler if you'd like me to look at
okay,
something.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions? We've got a couple of comments. Anthony Childress mentioned that he's going to start using Camel Case for his Facebook posts. And it does make more emphasis, and it is hard for people to read words without the Camel Case. But I also know that some social media tools really like autocorrect, or they make it hard for you to use the Camel Case. But
Oh.
I don't know how prevalent that is.
I've not run into that, but if you do, I would be interested in knowing specifically which tools are forcing lowercase. It's like it forces it to be lowercase. Is
well, it tries to auto correct, or it's giving you suggestions for hashtags, and so you can just click on them, and so it would be real easy to just click through, and instead you have to persevere and.
Right. So if the majority of people are using the same hashtag with lowercase, it's going to feed that to you. Kind of. Okay.
Exactly. So you just have to do it manually and be vigilant. That's all.
Absolutely. Yes. And maybe eventually those that are kind of automatically fed to us will be with Camel Case, because more of us will be
That's
using.
what I hope. That's what I hope.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm not seeing anything else yet.
Okay.
So what about you've talked a lot about Microsoft products. How is Google doing with Google Docs and slides and all of that? How are they with accessibility? Is it getting better?
It is. You can add alt text to images. You can add headings. So you can create some pretty good accessible Google Docs. The things that I've run into that are problematic with Google are if you try to take it and save it as a PDF, then it doesn't work out too well in terms of accessibility. Saving to a PDF from Microsoft products goes a little bit more, well, probably a lot more smoothly in terms of creating an end product that's more accessible. So it kind of depends on what your ultimate goal is there. Good question, though.
Some of you who are in who work in state parks, I know that a couple of you are on here. I'd be interested in knowing if there are, and of course, Melanie, you work in a statewide agency, right? So how is the state doing in some of these kind of larger institutions about their accessibility? And so if some of you with state parks want to comment on that, and then Melanie, across the university system, what are you seeing?
I would say it's pretty much all over the map in terms of state agencies and universities and colleges. It really kind of depends. I think digital access is a cultural shift that people have to make as an organization. And so it really depends a lot on how much it's prioritized. The folks the folks at Arkansas State Parks have been really interested in digital access lately and have attended a lot of my webinars, and some of them have been following up with questions. And I think that's kind of how it gets started, is when an agency has that aha moment and says, you know what, this is important, and we just want to make it a part of how we do business. And once that happens and new people come on board and they are automatically onboarded with that philosophy, then it gets easier and easier for an agency or university to maintain that commitment and culture of digital access.
Mm-hmm. Good. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the projects that I'm working with, in fact, the hat that I wear today is we receive funding from a program called ICANN, and they are they're a program for Arkansas that provides a lot of assistive technology to Arkansans. And one of their goals is to increase the digital access in Arkansas. So through that project, it's just a little bitty project, but I do provide a lot of training to state agencies that request it. So, more and more people are asking for it, recognizing that it's important. And some of the shifts that can happen are, one of the things I've seen happen is, for example, one agency that hired a blind person that had never had a blind person working in that agency, all of a sudden they realized, oh, we're sending all of this stuff around and this person doesn't have access to it. And so though the learning curve was rather steep, there was kind of an immediate commitment to making sure that access was provided, and that can quickly change the culture of an organization.
Great. Heather Marie commented on that too. And I know that she's at Crystal Bridges, and they've been working on these things. In particular, she noted in the chat that they're using Camel Case for their email addresses on their website as well.
Oh, that's great. Yes.
Yeah, I could see how helpful that would be. So you have the perfect segue. Oh, we do have a question here. How would you recommend being more accessible for live events via social media, such as Instagram or Facebook Live, which is a great question.
Yes, absolutely. So most of the platforms that allow you to go live also allow you to hire a captioner like you've done today. So let's say that we were, there's some things where it breaks down, and I have to say, I don't remember exactly how well, for example, let's say we were taking Zoom and you were turning on the feature that allows it to go to Facebook Live. I can't remember if the captions automatically would show up on Facebook, but the captioning company that you work with can usually make sure that there's what's called an API token, make sure that it's in all the locations it needs to be, so that those captions would also be there. So that's one of the main things that you would consider if you're doing a lot of social media live events, is just to make sure that wherever you're feeding to, the captions are going along with it. And like I say, most of the really commonly used platforms, it's possible. You just have to know what you're doing or work with a provider who knows what they're doing. And like I say, most of the captionists have gotten really good, really fast at knowing how to walk you through making sure that not only you're providing the captions, but it's showing up where it needs to show up.
That's great. I did not know that you could do that through, well, like Facebook Live. So that's a great question and a great piece of information, I think. Well, one of the, so the question I was going to ask, and this is a good way to close things out, we're coming up on 3:15. What is the best way if we want to train our staff? Like, what services does Partners provide? And are there other things that you had a list of resources there too, which is great. But, if we want this training and the things like what you talk about for other groups, do we just get in touch with you?
Absolutely. You're welcome to reach out to me if you would like to have, at this point, it would all be virtual, but if you want more like hands-on training where, for example, one of the things I'm trying to do to find ways of doing remotely is having people, like walking through things with people so that they could set up where they could follow what I'm doing, but also work on their computer to try
Right.
things out, because I think most people learn hands-on better. So if something like that interests you, that's one of the things I'm trying to do more of. We also have a lot of just-in-time resources on the exploreaccess.org site. There there's a tutorial that walks you through all of the aspects of accessibility with Word and PowerPoint. There's the social media toolkit. What else is there? Social media. There's also a lot of resources on that handouts page that where I've provided previous sessions on things like Zoom and other technologies. So there's things that you can start with there. I also, one of my goals in the next few weeks is to go back and take all of the webinars that I've provided and have the videos of those, links to those on the website so that people can review that content. But whether you want to do it on your own time, there's like I said, I'm certainly not the only resource now that you know, we have access to people all over the world in webinars. There are all kinds of good webinars on digital access that you can find out there. There's a company called DEQUE that does some great webinars, and I'll send a follow-up to you, Angie, and you feel free to pass that along to everybody with some of the resources that would be good, provide good webinars or other tools for people to follow up with.
That is great. That's really helpful. I have a couple of groups. I have ideas for you, so you'll have work to do.
Okay.
Heather Marie is also saying thank you. She's in the chat, and she said, like always, you're awesome and make attendees feel empowered to implement these things. And Scott says, or Anthony says, I've thoroughly enjoyed today's session and he's ready for the next one. So we appreciate it. This is really helpful, and this is the kind of work museums everywhere are trying to do. So,
well, thank you so much. One last thing I'd like to mention before we close is that actually inspired by the conversations with Heather Marie and AMA about making sure webinars and actually it started out with your actually live conference, but then it switched to webinar, making sure it's accessible. The Arkansas Humanities Council has established a new grant called the Access Grant, and they will be providing mini grants to humanities-based organizations. Oh, it's called the Access to Humanities Grant. Sorry, I just was corrected. And they'll be providing these mini grants to humanities-based organizations or organizations that are doing humanities-based programming to make sure that they're accessible. And that could mean providing captioning. It could mean making sure that a website is accessible or documents are accessible. So there will be money available to support that in your organizations if you are doing humanities related work.
that is fantastic. What a great resource. And we'll definitely, I bet there's a whole bunch of people listening to this who will be rushing to the Humanities Council website to start working on that.
Yeah, it's not quite up yet, but it should be posted certainly by the beginning of the year. By January is what I'm hearing.
Okay, all right. Literally hearing. Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. And if anybody has questions, you're welcome to follow up with me and I'll pass them on, or directly to Melanie. And we so appreciate you doing this for us. And thank you for also your sponsorship of our virtual sessions. We
Glad to
appreciate
do it. All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
All
Thank
right.
you
Thanks,
to
everybody.
everyone.
Yes. Thanks, Melanie. Okay. I'm going to turn things off, and we'll see you all on December 9th. Have a good day.